Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Ask TWW, where you guys ask the questions and I do my best to answer them. Now, if you'd like to have your question answered in this format, just head over to the membership area of YouTube or head over to Patreon, and all supporters get access to a weekly call for questions. I answer all the questions, but some of them I pick and bring into this Ask TWW series that we do here. So thanks everybody for their support. All right, let's get to the topics. Are dovetails truly necessary for drawers? What's the correct height for a table saw? How to know if a router collet is due for replacement? What I do with scraps and offcuts during a project? And fine-tuning a hand-cut dovetail joint. First up is a question from Corrado89 on YouTube. I'm nearing completion of my kitchen cabinets and will be building drawers for my lowers soon. I don't have a dovetail jig and was thinking of doing either butt joints with dominoes or locking rabbet joints. Material will be 5/8 maple with 1/4-inch Baltic birch lower panels and 1/2-inch Baltic birch lowers on the bigger drawers. Do you see any issue with using either of these joint methods for a home that we plan to stay in for a long time? So as much as I'm a fan of giving every project a little bit extra, you certainly don't have to. I honestly don't think that dovetails are truly necessary for drawers. Plenty of fine furniture and heavy-duty furniture is built with drawers that do not feature dovetails. Here are just some examples from my own collection. This is a hall table that I made early in my career. Rabbets are reinforced with metal dowels, and these joints are not going anywhere. This is a dresser that I made in 2010 featuring a modified rabbet that's reinforced with wood dowels. Here's a basic drawer in my shop that holds many pounds, and it's just rabbets reinforced with screws. And here's an interesting one. These are sliding dovetails on my workbench cabinet. Yeah, it's called a dovetail, but it's definitely not the same thing that most people think of when we talk about dovetail drawers. So I'm certainly not saying that people shouldn't be building drawers with dovetails. They're great, and a lot of my furniture features dovetails. But what I am saying is that not having dovetails doesn't mean that your project is doomed. There are lots of great ways to build drawers, and you mentioned a couple good ones: reinforcement with dominoes and a locking rabbet joint. Both are fantastic. By the way, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about some of these joints that we mentioned here, I've got a book called Essential Joinery that goes through those and a whole bunch more for casework, drawers, all kinds of things dealing with woodworking. So this is a good one. You can check it out at twwstore.com, Amazon, or local bookstores. Alan H. on Patreon says, I bought a new SawStop ICS. Its table elevation feels too low for me. I'm considering putting some spacers in the mobile base to raise it slightly more than an inch to my belt height. Do you have an opinion or know of a standard for what height a table saw should be? Well, I would say most table saws are probably going to come in around 34 to 36 inches high. Mine comes in at 34.5, and that's a SawStop PCS with the industrial mobile base. So the trick with a standardization of table saw height is that people come in all different shapes and sizes. So here are some things you really want to think about when it comes to table saw height. First and foremost is safety. Are you able to easily push material all the way past the blade without leaning over top of the blade? Hovering over the blade is a great way to get a board to the face, so if that's the case, the saw is probably too low. Conversely, if you find that you're unable to keep good downward pressure on the workpiece and you're struggling to maintain control at the end of the cut, that could indicate that the table is too high for you. Now, you mentioned belt height, and I think that's of particular concern. While I don't want to have a kickback to any part of my body, I especially don't want a kickback to the baby maker. So it seems like it might be smart to have that stuff below the top of the table saw. Now, I'm 5'11", and as you can see, I'm dangerously close to my no-no zone, and my waistline is a few inches higher, so perhaps I could do with a little increase in height on my own saw. So I think a pretty wide range of individuals would be covered by that 34 to 36 inch table saw height range. But if you're not comfortable, you may need to do something about it. I mean, if you don't feel like you're controlling the workpiece effectively through the entire cut, if you see that your twig and berries is in line with any kind of kickback that might happen, well, those are reasons that you may want to shim that thing up. Next up, we have Ray B. He says, the collet on my router table no longer needs to wrench twice. When it was younger, I could loosen it, spin it by hand, and it would get to the point where I needed to wrench it again. Does this mean I need to buy a new collet? All right, so bear with me. I don't always have the right terminology for stuff like this, but let's take a closer look and see what Ray's referring to with this double wrenching situation. When loosening a self-releasing collet, you always have this initial point of resistance. Once you break through that, you can usually continue to loosen it by hand until the next point where the wrench is required again. After that, the bit can escape its prison. So what's going on here? Let's dissect how a collet actually works. The collet itself consists of a tapered sleeve and a large nut. When loosely attached to the router, the bit can slide in and out as needed. As you begin to tighten the nut, the tapered sleeve is pushed further into the tapered spindle of the router, forcing the sleeve to grip the bit. So tightening a collet only has one point of resistance, and when it's tight, it's tight. So why does loosening it have 2 points of resistance? Well, the first point is just the nut coming loose of the router's threads. And even though the nut is now loose, we still have a tapered sleeve that's locked into the tapered spindle recess by friction. So as we continue to rotate the nut, eventually the nut contacts either a shoulder or, in my case, an O-ring that's attached to the tapered sleeve. As we continue to loosen the nut, the tapered sleeve is essentially pulled out of the spindle. So to raise questions, should he buy a new collet? It's kind of hard to say without really inspecting what's happening here, but if he's only got one stage of loosening and the bits are still being held in securely, the only thing I could think of is that maybe whatever play was there before is no longer there. So as he goes to loosen the nut, it's immediately contacting the O-ring or the shoulder and then also pulling the taper out of the spindle. Of course, the other thing could very well be that he has some kind of contamination on those tapers, so he's not really getting a good friction fit to hold the bit in place. So the first thing I would do is give the collet a cleaning. Take the collet itself, you could soak it in some mineral spirits, just some kind of solvent that might loosen up any oil, dirt, grease, anything that might be on the surface. Check that tapered area with your fingers. Make sure there's no burrs on there so it's nice and smooth, and just try to clean everything up. Also, go to the router, make sure you loosen up any dirt that might be packed into the spindle. You could have some sort of pressed down stuff that you can dislodge with a brush and then suck out with a vacuum. And once everything is dry, reassemble and see if you have any change to what's going on. The most important thing I'm worried about here is that the bit comes loose. That's super dangerous, and collets really aren't that expensive, so if there's any doubt whatsoever, go ahead and replace it. But I think once you try this cleaning, you'll feel a little bit better about whether it's worth the investment to buy a new one, or whether this one just suddenly starts to grip a little bit better again, and then you have 2 stages of that loosening process. And now a quick word from our sponsor, me. I recently went down a houseplant rabbit hole, and what went from just a couple of plants for my office soon turned into having more plants than places to put them. I found a lot of plant stands online, but none of them had the look or stability that I wanted, so I decided to make my own. In this course, I'll show you how the design evolved through several versions, and then we'll get into the build details. There's really no complex joinery here, just a lot of small parts because of the slat shelf design. The slats are housed by notched rails, and the rails are connected via small dowels. The shelves are attached via simple dados cut into the verticals, and we'll even add extra support to the slats where needed. The finish is a durable, water-resistant varnish that's easy to apply by hand. It's a fun build that's practical and makes a great gift for that plant lover in your life. Or maybe it's you. Head to thewoodwhispererguild.com for more details. This course launches pretty soon, so get your pre-order in today and save. All right, next up is Alex Adams from Patreon. Where do you keep your project offcuts while the project is in progress? And I'm talking stuff that's around 6 to 48 inches and is probably less than 2 inches wide, but is still useful for repairs and whatnot. I do have a discard bucket for firewood and mulch, but the tall 10x10 box I use to keep useful scraps is hard to sort through and even remember what I have. So first things first, if you're not already doing this, you should absolutely be keeping the scrap and offcuts from every project until the project is done. You just never know when you need some extra material, you need an extra part, or you make a mistake and you want some kind of grain and color matched material that you can use from the project parts themselves. So keep that stuff around, but where do you keep them? Well, I keep mine everywhere. Typically, you'll find a little pile of offcuts right next to the tool that made them. This obviously creates a little bit of a trip hazard, so I'm not necessarily recommending you do that. I'm just telling you what I do. Having the parts in these little piles is actually pretty useful to me, since being close to a particular tool helps me identify which component the scrap came from and what part of the process produced it. And after the project is complete, I then go through everything, decide what I want to keep around and put in my scrap pile in the shop, and then the rest of it either goes into the garbage, honestly, or into a burn pile. Next up, we've got Rich from Patreon. I'm newer at the hand-cut dovetail thing and finding their fitting super snug, which I like, but I did have a pin split on the end. I'm wondering how I could find out what to trim down when the whole thing is snug. Obviously, the best course of action is more practice, and more practice means you get closer to a perfect fit right off the saw, but ultimately that takes a while to achieve, and even sometimes the best of us will still make a joint that fits too tight, so what do we do? And the very first thing you should do is check your pins and tails to make sure they're square. Sometimes you don't really have like high points so much as a complete taper because your saw went off track. So sometimes just by correcting that and squaring things up, you'll find that everything just fits a little bit better. So let's assume you've done that. Now what? Well, a trick I use that helps me evaluate a really tricky fit is marking the sides of my pins or tails with a pencil. I'll just shade the side of this pin pretty heavily and then see what happens when we try to smack in the tail board. Now, if you hit a point where there's too much resistance, you can stop, back it out, and see what you see. Hopefully you'll notice two things. The board that initially got the pencil marks should show a few areas where the pencil lines have smeared. Those are contact points. On the piece that didn't receive the pencil, we should start to see a little bit of the pencil transferred over. These marks are essentially telling you where you can safely remove some material. Now, you really only want to remove material from either the pins or the tails just to keep it simple. And how do you know which one to pick? Well, for me, it's just which one is easier to get to. In some cases, it's easier to get at those tails. In other cases, easier to get at the pins. You can repeat this process over and over, doing a light trim, replacing the pencil marks, test fitting, and trimming again until you have the perfect fit. Now, there certainly may be other techniques for doing this, but this is one that's always worked for me. So that's going to do it today for Ask TWW. Thank you everybody for your support. And reminder, if you want to have your question answered on the show, head over to the membership area here on YouTube or over to Patreon. In both places, we ask for questions each week and answer those questions for you guys and put some of them on this show. So thank you for your support, everybody. Be good. We'll see you next time.